Good, right. All hail the sentient cloud. Begin testing.
Hello everyone, and welcome. So it has been quite a while since I last produced a video, and I'll just say before I really get into the meat of this video, I do plan to start producing videos on a more consistent basis, and I also plan to start streaming on YouTube. I'm already streaming on Twitch if you guys want to check it out there, but I'm figuring out how to stream to both platforms simultaneously. But with all that said, let's get into the actual meat of the video. So, I took some time to work on fixing the text editor, and I run into a couple of problems that I needed to fix, and so I'll just kind of explain some of the basics for that. And to do that, I think it might be easier to have a visual aid. Maybe show you guys what it looks like before I finish this. Let's just go and open up app.cpp. So this is the old editor. It looks very similar because I did some stuff to it in order to prevent some crashes that I was having. One of the major issues that I ran into with this editor was the highlighting system. I had repeated crashes due to how it worked and how it interacted with the screen. I would basically be loading data into the screen array, and it ended up kind of ruining things on repeated instances to the point where I basically just couldn't work with it without having removed that system. So I already removed the highlighting and made it just a monochrome color. I went ahead and picked something that's fairly easy on the eyes, especially if I've been doing a lot of looking at the screen. This color is pretty easy to look at, so that's why I picked it. Not the prettiest, but suits my needs. But you'll notice that the text, the cursor, can bounce around at weird intervals. And the reason for that is every time the advance function is called, it also calls and tries to relocate the cursor every single time, which is not great. The other problem is there's no way for me to move multiple lines at once. I have to move a single line at a time, and that means that I'm spending quite a lot of time just moving down to wherever I'm working. If I'm working on a file that's 500 or 1,000 lines long, that's simply untenable. So that was something I had to fix. I had to put in a system where it would move to an arbitrary line rather than having to go all the way down from the top. Next, and this is a problem that if you'd seen any of the live streams you're very familiar with, is the copying and pasting. If I tried to copy more text than, I think it's like 500 bytes or so, it would freak out. It would crash. And that's just because of the way that I had set up the copying and pasting system. I didn't have enough space for the characters that I was copying. There are some other problems, issues with the text buffer itself not being very well tested, so it ended up crashing, not having any information on lines, so I wasn't aware of where each line started apart from just the new line character that was there, and that's not really good enough to be useful. So I'll go ahead and show you guys the new editor. So it looks very similar, but I changed quite a bit. First off, I went ahead and moved most of the actual text buffer logic into this gap buffer here. The text buffer itself sort of serves as a controller for this and the screen functionality. And in addition to some of the basic stuff here, I also added in a vector to store pre and post cursor lines. These are indexed to the beginning and end of the buffer respectively, so that I don't have to adjust them when I'm moving the cursor around. I just have to, if I run into one of the entries from this side, I just have to move it over to this side, and vice versa. So if I go to the .cpp file, and we'll go ahead and move here. As you'll notice, I can move arbitrary distances without any issue. If I press 1 and then M, I'll move back to line 1. If I press 0 and M, it will still stay at line 1 because that's the highest it can go, or the lowest it can go, I guess, depending on your perspective. If I type in something like 1,000, it'll just move me all the way to the bottom in this case. And that's just because there's not 1,000 lines, so it will stop at the last line. So let me move back to here. The insert function and the remove functions both respect line numbers and will actually remove entries from those pre and post cursor lines depending on if they're inserting new ones or not. It also maintains the line index, and that's basically the position horizontally for this cursor, and that takes into account things like the tabs as well as Unicode characters, although Unicode isn't currently supported. I haven't actually done that just because I don't really use Unicode, and it's more trouble than it's probably worth in the long run. So if we go down here, advance, similar story to insert, but here if I'm moving over a line number or a post-cursor lines entry, it pushes that entry onto the precursor lines and removes it from the post-cursor lines. And the same goes for when you go in reverse. Home and end are a lot simpler now because I can just access the line number information. And same goes for up and down. I went ahead and changed this so that the distance here refers to how many lines you go up. So it can go an arbitrary number of lines up all the way up to the very top in one function call. And it also does maintain the line index correctly. And you'll notice, as I mentioned before, with the previous editor, the cursor would bounce around a bit, and now it does not because I know precisely where the cursor should be. So we'll go ahead and go to the screen next. There's not a whole lot that changed here. The main difference is I went ahead and removed the style from this whole setup, and that's just because I found I wasn't really taking advantage of it to the point where it would be that useful, and it was just causing issues. So I decided to cut that out. I also kind of just generally, I haven't even removed this, but I've basically been ignoring the presence of all of the other colors that I could use. I've just been kind of ignoring them and using this color, and if I press Y, then I can select, and so it's very clear to see what I'm selecting. This load string function has been reworked so that it now can handle strings with new line characters in it, and it'll actually print the string up to the new line, put blank spaces after that, move down a line, print all the contents, and then blank spaces after the new line, and so on and so forth, so I can print a long string rather than doing individual strings that are like short single line strings. Nothing's really changed in draw, just that I removed the parse style, and the same for the rest of this, so it's remained largely the same. Text buffer. So in here, there were a fair number of changes. For one, I changed the way that the text is printed out because I added that load string function to the screen. I no longer had to go through each individual portion of the kind of text frame here and put the characters in there by hand. So that made things a little bit easier. And I'll just go ahead and go down to this section because this one's a bit more sane. These are a little different. In the normal case, when I'm not trying to select things, these will both trigger. So if the precursor index is greater than 0, it will print out everything that is within the precursor side of the buffer. So that's basically everything here. And then everything in the postcursor buffer is done if the postcursor index is less than capacity. So that prints everything down here. Now with selection, things are a little bit more complicated because, of course, you're dealing with at least 2, but usually 3 different segments that need to be printed. One with no color, and then this sort of lighter background, and then this segment here. It also can select text including stuff off screen, and it won't crap itself. So that's pretty cool. A lot of the functions that used to be, actually I'll cover get cursor position first. This function has been changed, so now instead of going through the entire buffer to figure out where the cursor should be located, it just gets the current line number and the current line index. And that's it. So pretty simple. Advanced has been replaced largely with this stuff in the gap buffer. The only thing I had to make sure is that the screen start line, this part right up here, was properly set. And then, if you're moving around, selection would cause it to update the frame just to make sure that the highlighting is working properly, like the selection highlight. End, same basic deal. Down, the only thing I really had to add in here was stuff so that when you move down, if you go too far, it'll start to scroll the screen. And same basic stuff for home and up and retreat. All of that stuff is very similar. I also created this move function. This just moves to a selected line, and if the line is outside of the possible lines within that buffer, then everything will just be handled and it'll just take care of it, which is pretty neat. Insert, basically the same. The only thing I've been trying to figure out if there's a reasonable way to make it so that when I'm just going to show you here, if I were to put a closing brace, make it so it would delete this this tab character. I haven't found an easy way to do that, and it's not something that's important enough for me to really spend more time working on. It was just like a neat idea and something that I quite like from certain languages. However, that is something that is not a consistent feature of all languages, so I might just exclude it and then make it something that's on a more per language basis. So, and then most of this stuff is not different. I did go ahead and move this to base64 conversion function here just to make it so that the get selection function didn't have to work across different files. So it does all of this within the same file. And it can handle way more than 500 characters. I think that technically speaking, so the number of base64 characters, the command OSC 52 is supposed to be able to handle is like 100K, which once you convert that to ASCII, it's like 70,000-ish, I think. So 70,000 characters, pretty much going to handle anything I could possibly throw at it. And then this is just getting scope count. So basically, if I want to insert a character, let's go ahead and move here real quick. It will add in tabs in order to do that. And that does work with open braces. So if I go here, it will add in a new tab because of that open brace. So that's pretty cool. I will probably not include this particular feature as a part of this part of the setup. This will be something that will be taken care of by language-specific stuff, I guess, because this is a scoping thing. Like if you're using Python, for example, you would expect something more like, what is it? It's like def, and then fn name, and that, and then it would insert a tab here. But that's not always the case for every language. So that's something that's going to have to be rolled individually for each language. But for what I'm doing, this works fine. Okay, we'll go to app.cpp, and then I think that's basically everything that this new editor has that's new. And by the way, if I'm going too fast or I'm not explaining things enough, I will be releasing the code for this. I'll be sharing a link to the GitHub so that you guys can take a look at it if you're curious. I will say in advance that this code base is a bit of a mess at this point because some things have been added and removed and whatnot, and it's certainly not clean, but it will work. So here, and I also added this in other segments, this JK, HJK, and L for movement will allow me to move an arbitrary number of spaces. So for example, if I want to go up 10 spaces, I just type in 10 and then K, and I'll move up 10 spaces. If I want to move right 5 spaces, 5, L, I move right 5 spaces, which is pretty cool. Makes things a lot easier. Let's see. Here's that M command that I talked about before, moving to arbitrary lines. And this is just to get numbers for commands, like if I want to move to line 275, I would type in 275, and those numbers are being processed here. So if I press M, it'll move me down to line 275. So here in insert input, the only major change was hooking in some of the new functions and adding in this little char diff so that if I failed to insert or remove something, it's not going to say that I modified something. So pretty reasonable stuff. Select input, not a whole lot was practically changed, but most of it was just, for example, changing how some of the functions behaved. So get selection and delete selection no longer reset the selection. That's only done when I use cancel. And there were various reasons for that. Some of them were mostly relating to bugs. So it made more sense to do it that way. And I also made it so that D now behaves more similarly to how it would in NeoVim. So if I press D and then I select a portion of text, it will copy it and delete it. And then I made it so that the backspace will just delete text. So if I do something like this, and then I do this, and then press backspace while it's selected, it will just delete it. Okay. Nothing much changed here. The only major change was in process global input, and that was just to get the copying and pasting to work correctly. So I had to make some extensions to this. For example, normally when I was doing this, it would copy or grab input from the standard input, and it would grab a whole bunch of text, including this little segment here, which is to introduce the fact that I'm using OSC 52. And I basically had to kind of trim that off in order for the alignment of base 64 characters to ASCII characters to be properly respected. Otherwise, I'd just be getting gibberish characters out, which is obviously not great. Okay. So that's basically everything. And the end result is a much better text editor. It feels much better to use. I still need to get used to the fact that I can move up and down without having to waste my life just scrolling. If I want to go to the top, I just press 0 and M, and I'm right there. That's a little new to me, so I've got to get used to that. But yeah, I mean, so far it's been working great. I've been running into some errors here and there that need to be fixed, but it's all stuff that's relatively reasonable to fix. So, I'm pretty happy about it. And with that, we're coming to the end of the video, and so I guess I'll go and tease a little bit of what's going to be coming up. First of all, I am going to be working on a transpiler for the programming language that I'm going to be writing the new editor in. So my plan is to write a transpiler that will transpile this programming language I'm designing into C code, and then I can compile that C code, or link other stuff to it and then compile it, things like that. So I need to build that transpiler, and I'll talk more about that project in the future. And like I said, I'm going to be putting this, linking this on my GitHub here. So that should be in the description. If it's not, yell at me. And I plan to be doing streams on YouTube as well as on Twitch. If you guys want to just check me out on Twitch, it's guaranteed to be on there, but I should also be streaming on YouTube here pretty soon. So, with all that said, thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this interesting and or useful, and I will see you in the next episode. Goodbye.